Luckily, the skipper had anticipated the accident and brought a 40-foot pine tree from Palmyra just in case. And his hunch had paid off. Now the crew had to shape it and fit it, while the ketch wallowed dangerously. But when the work was done, the Claraborg was ready to sail again.
Once a week we had to spare a little fresh water to wash the salt from the cat's fur. Clara the dog thought it was great fun, until it was her turn. Trader signalled their arrival in the Gilbert Isles. Soon the ever-present customs and quarantine boats were around the ketch, filling the formalities of landing in a foreign country. After all the red tape was over, thoughts turned to going ashore and exploring yet another tropical island. After checking out the general village life, John and Albie borrowed a car and followed the coastline, where they discovered a unique island custom. We first thought the jetties running out into the sea were used for fishing or loading canoes when the tides were in. It seemed each family had its own jetty, but then we realised that the villagers were just walking out to the hut on the end, sitting there for a while and wandering back. It was only when I ventured out to see what was going on that I realised they were going to the toilet.
For a group of sea scouts on the main island in the Gilbert Isles, the arrival of the Claraborg was a great event. All their theory had been on old ketches such as this, so they spent hours on board asking questions and practicing splices. And when the scouts weren't there doing repairs, a troop of islanders would come aboard and entertain the crew with a bit of homespun music.
An islander bet me I wouldn't have the nerve to climb up to the top of the crow's nest and dive off, 50 feet up. I was really scared stiff, but we needed the money.
Off again. This time to Guam. The winds were right and the ship was moving at a good speed. Trouble again. The Claraborg had sprung a leak, not just a little leak. This one was filling the bilges faster than they could pump. That meant they were slowly sinking. The old timber hull had simply come apart at the seams under the heavy weather they'd experienced earlier. The leak was so big, it was sucking in fish weighing 3 pounds. The only thing to do was to don scuba gear, go down and patch it up with copper plates and underwater adhesive. Someone stood guard looking out for sharks. Finally fixed, the ship continued the leg to Guam.
from port one morning when the weather was fair. A gentle breeze it pushed them and no one gave a care. They sang and danced and laughed that night and opened up a keg. They're out to catch the monster whale that took the captain's eye. The captain said a piece of gold for he who sees my whale. So bend your backs and roll me lads, I know that we won't fail. Bend your backs and roll me lads and take me to me whale. Tonight we sing and dance and tomorrow night we sail. We sail into the harbour, no prouder men there'll be. We show them all we've captured, the monster from the sky. They saw the whale one morning when the weather was fair. The men were white as ghosts, the captain didn't care. I'll take this whale myself, he said, the weak can stay behind. The strong can share my glory, and tonight they'll share my The whale it came up closer, it was bigger than the sky. They lowered down the longboat, and they heard the captain cry, oh, bend your backs and roll me lads, and take me to me whale. Tonight we sing and dance, and tomorrow night we sail. We sail into the harbour, no prouder men there'll be. We'll show them all we've captured, the monster from the side. The whale it came so close that it almost tipped the boat. The captain raised his spear and he rammed it down its throat. The whale it gave a mournful cry and lifted its great tail and rode it down, smashing there.
After 6 hours, they were docking. And, sure enough, a visit from their friendly customs officer. But this check was different. Not the rather happy attitude of the customs men from their previous island stopovers. The Americans were thorough and efficient. In fact, they took such a long time, John and Albie decided to do a spot of cleaning while they waited for permission to go ashore. The once-a-week Guam village feast, complete with spit-roasted pig and mouth-watering satay. Every Sunday, a village somewhere in Guam holds a feast like this. Everyone from the other villages is invited, and they all take turns to be hosts. Albie was out meeting the locals. He figured it was his duty to learn all about them, the way they live, the way they work, their telephone numbers, if they had any. John figured if he ate enough at each feast, he could go from one village to another every Sunday and eat forever without paying a cent. In another part of Guam, though, an ancient form of betting, a cockfight. A fight to the death with birds which have sharpened spikes attached to their claws. All good things must come to an end. Albie tells his Guam girlfriend that he has to go. The ship is leaving the islands, and the boys will miss them too. Clarabourg is heading north away from friendly weather toward winter temperatures well below freezing. And once there, the boys will leave the ship that's been their home for almost a year. The skipper's offered them permanent places in his crew if they'll stay with him, plus a share of any salvage. But the boys reluctantly say no. They want a boat of their own. That's now their biggest single ambition, and to achieve it, they've got to go back to the real world
to make some money, because between them they're down to their last $100. Still, life wasn't meant to be easy.
Coming straight from the tropics to midwinter in Japan, John and I nearly froze in the 10 degrees below zero weather. This was really shoe-wearing weather, and in having them cleaned, John hoped that the warmth would penetrate through to his toes. From Tokyo, we hitched to the ancient city of Kyoto, once the capital of Japan. We asked the local police for a bed for the night. They passed us on to the Buddhist monk, who seemed to think we'd come to join their order. John and I were in for one hell of a shock. For a start, we had to clean all the floors. We had to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and have a shower in freezing cold water. That was part of their discipline. We were treating it as a bit of a game to start with, until the monks began punishment the Zen Buddhist way. A few of those and you start to learn what it's all about. I don't think we got along too well with the monks. It seemed the only time they smiled was when we were leaving. Still, it had been an experience for them to have two Australians like us with them for a week, and it sure was an experience for us. Unfortunately, though, we had to keep on the move, and we couldn't spend more time trying to fit into their way of life.
From Kyoto to Japan's most famous mountain, Mount Fuji. After spending a freezing night in the back of a truck, John and Albie woke to see one of the world's most awe-inspiring sights. The village that they'd hitched to was at the base of the mountain, so they tried to speak to a few of the locals to see if it's possible to climb to the top. The heavy snow made them change their minds. So then it was time to think of moving on, and why not up north to the island of Hokkaido and the city of Sapporo. Sapporo was the site of the Winter Olympics in Japan, and skiers, spectators and pressmen had come from all over the world to see some of the fastest, most exciting skiing ever performed. he figured it looked pretty easy, so he thought he'd give it a try. He tried, and he tried. In the end, he made it. From Sapporo to the most northerly tip of the island, the fishing town of Wakanowi. They arrived by train and bedded down for the night on the platform. For the 2 months they traveled around Japan, they never once paid for accommodation. The platform certainly was cold, though, especially when you're not wearing pants. After a bit of a stretch, and once the gear was all packed away in the good old Australian swag, they decided to wander around town and explore. And the first people they met were these old women sitting by the side of the road cooking their breakfast, bamboo shoots. And they asked John and Albie to join them, and in stilted English, they dubbed the two travellers Round Eyes. Some of the old ladies had never seen Westerners before, much less speak English.
We looked all around town, but the cold was getting us down, so we decided there and then to move to a warmer place.
And this is how they did it, on the Star of Peace. It was bound for Thailand, which was as good a place as any. These are pirate waters. And when John sighted something low and long and mysterious floating in the water, he sounded an alarm. But it was just a floating log, an escapee from a sawmill. And there was another escapee to come. The Star of Peace stopped in mid-ocean to aid the rescue of a parrot blown off course and brought down in the sea. Washed clean and gently dried, it flew off at the next sight of land. Japanese and Taiwanese fishing vessels are common in these oceans, and so are barracuda, feared by many skin divers because of its dagger-like teeth and its habit of attacking without reason. A Flying Dutchman on a trimaran hove to, long enough to tell the boys he was on his way to New Guinea. Like Albie and John, he was just out to see the world. A stowaway. A giant rhinoceros beetle, fully armed with a fearsome-looking set of horns. But he's really a harmless fellow who eats nothing more than bark. The captain didn't want to risk him eating any part of the Star of Peace, so he ordered him put ashore, which was really more for the beetle's sake than for the safety of the ship. On arriving, they wished they'd stayed in Japan. The Thai police decided to raid the hotel in which they were staying. They were after drugs and arrested everyone.
It was a couple of days before they realised we were not involved. We always seemed to end up in the poorer parts of town because our money was always low. We didn't dare cross this border post. Too many had been killed recently. Refugee boats were coming in continually.
A visit to a typical Thai village. They'd been trained over the years to get them down as quickly as possible. Albie asked if he could try and was told he wouldn't pass the IQ test. For John, a family reunion.
John and I were now heading to Penang, and the weather was getting pretty hot. Too hot for long trousers, so John just decided to shorten them a little. I wish he'd told me, though, because they were my best pants.
Short of money again, and what better way of seeing Penang and earning money while you do it? These rickshaws, though, were obviously made for Orientals, and not long, lanky-legged Australians like John.
Across to India. I don't think anyone entering Calcutta is prepared for the shock of this place. We were told there were more than 700,000 people living in the streets. It was a far cry from the Pacific. When we saw people lying around there, they were sunbaking. In Calcutta, they were either dying or dead.
It just didn't make sense. How there were so many people starving, with so many fat cows about. They were told the cow was a sacred animal. They hitched a ride on an elephant train, and the air conditioning was superb, although Albie, who drew a ride on a young, half-trained bull, had to keep ducking his head back to avoid being swiped by his trunk. As paying passengers this time, on a bus from Calcutta to Delhi. In a small Indian village, a ceremony is taking place. All the relatives had come from far away to witness the coming of age of this young girl. For all the villagers, it's an important occasion. Not far away, the real India struggles through another day.
By this stage, John and I were getting a bit sick of travelling in buses through India. They weren't only dangerous, they were hot and crowded as well. On this trip, we had something to take our minds off things. They were carrying an old prisoner on his way to Bombay jail, complete with chains around his feet and hands.
They picked up the steamer in Bombay, bound for Mombasa in East Africa. The first thing they saw was a cargo ship, well alight. The fire tugs did all they could, but they didn't save her. She went down.
It had always been a dream of mine to go to Africa. Now I was actually here, I got this eerie feeling that a lot was going to happen. The casualness of Kenya was what struck me at first. When it got cold, people would light fires of scrap wood in the main street and just sit around on the road talking and warming themselves. We saw little boys foraging through rubbish bins. They were so hungry. They didn't care who looked at them or what people thought.
From Mombasa, they hitchhiked to Nairobi, and it was certainly an eventful drive. You wouldn't want to hit this fellow at 60 miles an hour. Needless to say, they took it very slowly from then on. Camped outside Nairobi one night, Albie and John met a fellow adventurer, Shinsaku, a student from Osaka University, who just ridden his bicycle through some of the most dangerous parts of the African bush, armed with this machete against animal attack. Take a good look at this tiny little car, because it plays an important part in the rest of the world safari. It's called a DAF. It's a two-cylinder Dutch car.
We walked into a bicycle store one day in Nairobi, and there was this little car. Somebody had traded it in on a new push bike. We immediately bought it for only $200.
What is going on here? Well, all the boys know is that this bird is a southern ground hornbill that eats snakes and scares girls out of their tents for manly protection. He was good to have around. And this friendly little fellow, the boys named a Pedro. The DAF took them to places public transport could never take them, for better or for worse.
Our first long trip in the DAF was from Kenya to South Africa across some of the boggiest roads you'd see anywhere in the world. But we never stayed bogged for long. This little car was such a lightweight that if she got stuck, we just lifted her out.
If the boys were intrigued by the local sights, then so were the locals intrigued by the DAF. This albino African boy was ushered to John and Albie's little car by his black friends, who indicated to the boys that he was regarded as a special member of their tribe. It was a rare encounter for our travellers. A few hundred miles out of Nairobi, they had their first encounter from warriors from the Maasai tribe. They were friendly at first, when they thought Albie and John might want to buy some of their goods. But when John tried to have a closer look at their spears, they became distinctly cooler and very camera shy. Victoria Falls, the largest in the world and the source of the Nile. It's breathtaking country. The travelers are impressed.
Its bridge is the border between Zimbabwe, Rhodesia and Zambia. The boys had decided this was as good a spot as any to camp for a week or two. And who should arrive right behind them but the girls they'd saved from the Hornbill way back on the track. It seems one of the girls couldn't swim and wouldn't let go of the rope. But John was right there to save her. From there, they headed for Cape Town, South Africa, with the hope of making a bit of money as insurance salesmen. Each day they walked the streets as sales representatives of African Old Mutual, the largest insurance firm in all of Africa. Neither John nor Albie had had experience selling insurance before, but they were willing to give anything a go to get some money together. Their plan was to buy their own yacht and sail off around the world. But that costs money. So Albie tried the hard sell, and it paid off. In 12 weeks, he sold on average 1 policy a day, where most of the other staff were selling 1 a week. At the end of the 12 weeks, he'd made $14,000 in commission, just by stopping people